Margot walked through the dark and silent streets of New York, heading towards the Old Town Cemetery. Far from the bustling city center, the cemetery transformed into another world at night. The air was cool and damp. The yellow light of the street lamps did not reach deep into the cemetery. Margot's heart raced a little faster with each step she took over the old stones. Recently, Margot had been having the same recurring dream. In her dream, she wandered between old tombstones, feeling a whisper from deep within calling her. The dreams were so vivid that Margot decided to visit the cemetery in real life. That night, an unknown impulse drove her to this old, dark place. When Margot arrived at the rusty iron gate of the cemetery, she felt as if she received a signal from another world with the creaking of the gate's rusty hinges. As she stepped inside, the moonlight falling on the old stones cast a ghostly glow in the darkness. With every step, the wind's howl through the tombstones rose like a whisper against the night. Her eyes strained in the darkness, watching as everything seemed to be lost among the shadows. Margot began to move deeper into the cemetery. The old tombstones, lost among the shadows, held the memories of those who once lived on this land. The faint rustle of fallen leaves gradually disturbed the night. Margot's steps mixed with the soft sound she made on the grass. After wandering for a while, Margot stopped in front of an old tombstone. The inscriptions and symbols on the stone had been eroded by time. She was particularly drawn to a small grave next to the stone. Although she couldn't clearly read the name engraved on the grave, the darkened soil beside the stone seemed like a sign of an ancient time. As Margot carefully examined the tombstone, she noticed that the soil around it seemed to have been disturbed. Taking a deep breath, she began to dig through the soil. With each dig, the smell of old earth suggested that something from the depths of the past was about to be uncovered. She thought that there might be a connection between the tombstones and strange sounds she had seen in her dreams. After a while, she found an old box buried beneath the soil. The decayed wood of the box showed the effects of time. Margot carefully opened the lid and examined the contents. Inside, she found an old journal and several old photographs. The journal had, "This grave was the home of our fears," written in red ink. The photographs depicted people with strange and unsettling faces, seemingly from different eras. As Margot carefully worked with the old items she found, she felt that something was changing deep within the cemetery. Her curiosity grew, and the dark night seemed to signal the beginning of a story. With the journal and photographs in hand, she continued with determination to uncover the secrets of the old times. The moment Margot experienced that night might be the beginning of terrifying events to come. The cemetery awaited Margot to reveal a secret from the depths of the past, and what would unfold throughout the night was just the beginning of the dangers awaiting her. Margot carefully examined the old journal and photographs inside the box. As she opened the journal, the words on the yellowed pages seemed to beckon her to uncover the dark secrets of the past. The first page read, "This grave was the home of our fears." As Margot flipped through the pages, she came across texts detailing an ancient ritual. The writings described how rituals performed around the cemetery and the buried remained as part of the grave. The rituals described in the journal seemed intended not to release the spirits, but to bind them to the grave. The spirits' entrapment in the grave had caused dreadful entities to emerge from the depths. Margot wondered if these dark rituals were connected to the voices she had heard in her dreams. As she studied the photographs, she saw the group of people gathered in the cemetery in the old images. The individuals in the photos had strange, uneasy expressions. Their eyes reflected a sense of confinement and fear. Particularly notable was a figure in one photograph holding an ancient staff, surrounded by other people in a peculiar arrangement. The back of the photo read, "Releasing the spirits." Margot was deeply affected by this information. The rituals described left her with an unsettling sense of darkness throughout the night. The cemetery had become a place of growing fear and anxiety. Every whisper and rustle fed Margot's growing dread, causing her steps to quicken. Suddenly, Margot heard a scream from the cemetery. As she moved towards the direction of the sound, she felt a strange whisper coming from between the old tombstones. She quickened her pace towards the source of the scream. The place where the scream had originated led to a dark void in the depths of the cemetery. When Margot reached a tombstone, she found a decayed shovel buried next to an old stone. Symbols related to ancient rituals were carved into the shovel. Margot carefully examined the symbols, feeling as though she was in the midst of a deep secret among the ancient rituals and tombstones. She began to suspect that there was more mystery within the cemetery. Every moment spent in the cemetery turned into a tense experience. Margot's eyes searched for movement in every shadow, trying to decipher meaning in every whisper. Everything seemed to transform into a whirlpool, continually drawing her deeper with a call from the depths of the grave. As Margot struggled to cope with the unease she felt throughout the night, an unexpected sound from the cemetery's depths caught her attention. The sound reminded her of a melody used in ancient rituals, increasing the intensity of her fear as figures began to slowly appear. Margot's fear enveloped her completely, and the anxiety she felt with each step made the night even more terrifying. At this point, Margot needed to understand how the events she was experiencing were connected to the writings in the old journal. Deep within the cemetery, the dark secrets of the past were about to be revealed, and Margot had to uncover the extent of the danger lurking behind this secret. When Margot heard a scream in the depths of the old cemetery, her heart nearly stopped. The sound was coming from one of the cemetery's dark corners, echoing deeply and ominously. It wasn't just a noise from between the old stones. It felt almost like a call from the beyond. Her heart raced as each step drew her deeper into the darkness of the graveyard. Her eyes scanned the surrounding shadows until she noticed a figure. The dark silhouette partially obscured behind the ancient tombstones caught her attention. The figure evoked a chilling emptiness in its gaze. Margot's breaths quickened, and her thoughts raced with the idea of fleeing in terror. The dark figure moved slowly and silently. Margot's fear immobilized her, as if the figure's movements had a magnetic pull on her spirit. She knew she had to muster her courage. Deciding to retreat, she took slow, deliberate steps backward, determined to leave the cemetery. However, with each step, she felt the dark figure's gaze tracking her every move. The figure's eyes seemed to penetrate her soul, following her relentlessly. As Margot ran swiftly through the cemetery, the feeling of being pursued intensified her panic. Her heart pounded furiously, and her breathing became ragged. Approaching the cemetery's exit, the signs left behind by the figure became more pronounced with each of her steps. The old stones bore ancient bloodstains and scratch marks, clearly indicating the figure's previous presence and its current pursuit of her. Reaching the cemetery gate, Margot experienced a brief moment of relief, but she couldn't move without checking to see if the dark figure had followed her out. The fear she had felt inside now clung to her even outside. As she opened the cemetery gate, she looked back to see if the figure was visible, but only the empty, dark void of the cemetery greeted her. When she arrived home, Margot entered wearily and anxiously. The events of the night had left a profound impact on her. Sleeplessness and fear had etched deep marks on her mind. That night, she dreamt of being chased by the figure between the tombstones. The figure seemed to follow her relentlessly, leaving marks with every movement. The next morning, Margot decided to return to the area where she had found the old tombstone to investigate further. Still haunted by the terrifying experience of the night before, she carefully examined the old stones, paying close attention to the carved symbols. Perhaps she could find clues related to the ancient rituals. She thoroughly inspected the area around where she had found the old box. However, there were no noticeable changes among the tombstones and symbols. The deep traces of the fear she had experienced during the night still seemed to linger in the dark corners of the cemetery. Margot, unable to shake off the terror from the night before, was determined to understand the events and solve the mystery of the past. Margot needed to continue her research to grasp how profound a secret the cemetery's events could reveal. Her night of terror and the relentless pursuit by the figure seemed only the beginning, suggesting that the dark secrets of the past would shape future events. The next morning, Margot, still affected by the terrifying events at the cemetery, returned home. She was alone. Her family was on vacation outside the city, and the solitude deepened her fear. Her eyes searched for movement in every shadow, and every sound reminded her of the dark figure in the cemetery. The traces of the fear she experienced that night had become vivid in her mind. After a sleepless night, Margot decided to return to the cemetery the next day. She had a feeling that the old diary and photos held more secrets and that she wouldn't find peace until she uncovered them. Additionally, her research around the cemetery might reveal the secret behind the figure that was following her. When she arrived at the cemetery, the weather was overcast, and gray clouds created a dark atmosphere. Under the influence of the fear she had experienced the night before, Margot decided to venture deeper into the cemetery with her eyes wide open. She headed towards an area she had never visited before, a dark and empty part of the cemetery. Moss and decayed leaves on the stones indicated that no one had stepped here for years. As Margot walked slowly along a path between the old gravestones, she noticed a stone slightly raised from the ground at the end of the path. Curious, she approached and saw a hole underneath the stone. Upon examining the hole, she realized it was dark and deep. Taking a deep breath, she held a flashlight into the space beneath the stone. Inside, there was an old chest. The chest was covered in dirt, but Margot managed to carefully dig it out. When she opened the chest, she found an old metal box inside. The box was adorned with strange symbols and markings. Margot took a deep breath before opening the box. Inside, there was an ancient book and a few old objects. The book was written in an old language that Margot didn't understand. However, some familiar symbols and ancient writings in the book resembled those in the previous diary. The other objects in the box were old jewelry and strange items. Among them, a ring caught her attention. The stone on the ring resembled an ancient ritual symbol. Margot thought that this ring might be connected to the old rituals. On her way home to examine the items, her tension and curiosity grew. Margot decided to consult an old historian or an expert researcher for more information about the book and objects. However, time was running out, and the dark night was approaching quickly. Under the influence of the fear she experienced at the cemetery, she needed to gather information and solve this old mystery. As Margot returned home, a question lingered in her mind. What kind of danger would the secrets in these old objects in the book lead her to? Night was drawing near, and the influence of the cemetery's figure was intensifying. Margot needed to solve this old mystery. Otherwise, the darkness of the past would pull her even deeper. That night, Margot was alone with the old items and books she had found. The old language on the book concealed secrets about dark rituals. As Margot attempted to decipher these secrets, she began to understand the real danger behind the events at the cemetery. Throughout the night, as she examined the book and objects, she found clues related to places where ancient rituals had taken place. These clues indicated how certain gravestones and old rituals in the cemetery might have an impact. Margot spent the night sleepless, trying to understand the meaning of the terrifying events and old rituals she had experienced in the dark. The symbols and writings in the book indicated that the fear she experienced was just the beginning. The experiences at the cemetery and the items she found were a sign of a call from the depths of the past, and Margot had to understand and solve this call.